My name is Ben Fino-Radin, and I'm the Digital Repository Manager at the Museum of Modern Art.
Great. And you just presented this morning at the Digital Asset Symposium, or DAS, which is a project of AMIA. And tell me a little bit about what you were talking about today.
So today I was sharing an inside look at the system that houses our digital collections here at MoMA. So it's both the system that extracts information about our digital collections and puts them in these archival packages so that we can understand them in the future, but it's also the system that allows us to see the collections and play them and view them and listen to them and manage this preservation information.
And you started your presentation talking about fires at MoMA, actual fires that destroyed artwork, and were the impetus for the creation of collections conservation here at MoMA. Has there been a digital fire in your collections, or is this more of a proactive step that you guys are taking?
Proactive for sure. We've never had any disasters here, but it really grew out of the Matters in Media Art consortium between the SF MoMA, Tate, and MoMA, where essentially MoMA realized we needed a media conservator, and so that happened in 2007, and shortly thereafter Peter Alexic was hired in 2011, and then I was brought on in 2013.
Great. And one of the things that struck me in your talk was you talked about how many applications and systems you guys are generating specific to your needs here at MoMA. And you talked about off-the-shelf systems, some of them being technically transparent. You understand what they do, but they're not necessarily solving a problem that you need solved. You're obviously building these projects in collaboration with or cooperation with other museums. Are the solutions you're developing here things that you think will solve problems other museums have with digital collections?
Well, it's important to note that one of our systems, Archivematica, is off the shelf. And so the thing that we have built will eventually also be off the shelf because we built it and it's bespoke, but we are giving it away to the world as free and open source software. And so I think actually that it won't only serve museums. I think that it is ready for that. I think that it will serve museums very soon once we release it. But I think actually it will be useful for anybody doing any kind of digital preservation, especially for AV-rich collections. It's very much designed for that. But really at its core, Binder is something that's designed for managing archival packages and leveraging the rich metadata that Archivematica produces. So that's something that's useful to anyone who uses Archivematica or something similar that produces these kinds of archival packages. And yeah.
So would you say that managing digital collections in museums is more similar to or different from managing digital collections in any other context?
Well, it's very different in the sense that we are slower. Our collections tend to be different in the sense that, and when I say we're slower, I mean that we have an exhibition schedule that's planned years in advance, so we know what's going to happen. We hear about acquisitions, maybe half a year before they happen. Sometimes it's a little quicker than that. But I think the real key is the content. Museums have much more moving image material than archives and libraries typically do. Of course, it depends on the kind of archive. If you're, a film archive, of course you have moving image material. But, generally speaking, in the library and archive world, they're dealing with a lot of textual materials, still images, and higher volumes of files and smaller file sizes. And that's a critical difference because if you look at things like checksumming, for example, you can checksum, let's say, 50 terabytes of billions of files much more quickly than you can checksum, 50 terabytes of 50 files, because checksumming works in a manner where you have to read each bit sequentially. You can't multi-thread that process. Sure. Whereas if you have 5 files, you can multi-thread and do those all at the same time. Whereas if that's just one file, you can't. It has to be linear.
So the character of the assets you're managing is somewhat different in the museum environment than it might be someplace else.
Precisely, yeah. And if you look at things like, for example, Mike Smorrell, who worked on the Chronopolis project, shared with me a presentation that he gave where they were looking at the benchmarking of checksumming, fixity checks, and these institutions were all way faster than us. And I realized it was because their file size to file count ratio is different. We might have the same amount of stuff, of physical, or rather digital space, but fewer files. Mm-hmm. So we'll occupy the same storage space with 50 files, whereas they'll occupy it with 3 million files. So the nature of them in that sense is completely and totally different.
It's funny. I think that many people would think that if you have fewer files, the management of them must be so much easier. But as you're pointing out, it's very different when the files are bigger or when the files are more complex.
Yeah, I mean, it is easier from certain content management perspectives, but from a digital preservation perspective, they're much, much more challenging. From a strict, nuts and bolts kind of like laying pipe in the ground infrastructure perspective, it's much more challenging. Computers just like lots of little files. Actually, that's not completely accurate, but...
We'll just say it is. We'll just make gross generalizations about what computers like.
That sounds good.
What's the relationship between digital asset management and the digital repository at MoMA and art conservation? What's the difference between the file and the work here?
Well, there's a few things there that you just said. So the difference between digital asset management and conservation at MoMA is that we have our own system that's designed for digital preservation because we looked around at the various systems at MoMA and realized none of them were doing real digital preservation, so we needed something that did that. We supply access copies of the collections to our dam, so we do put these things in the dam, but we understand that it's just an access copy. It's not something you could pull down and put in an exhibition, and it's also fine if it's not checksummed or something like that because we have a system that's doing that on the masters. But in terms of the difference between conservation and digital asset management, they're vast. I mean, digital asset management is about how am I going to provide access to this stuff? How am I going to manage it? Conservation is about the whole 360-degree view of the work, the technical analysis, the technical art history, the scholarship, the managing of change. We have a whole code of ethics, and almost century-old area of professional practice that's been developed through peer review and, adversarial debate. And but it's a young field. I mean, when I was showing the fact that MoMA had no conservators until almost the 60s, until 1958, that's actually parallel to the evolution of the conservation field. Like contemporary conservation didn't really start to emerge until the early 60s.
Well, that brings me to what is my last question, and then I'm going to let you go and enjoy your colleagues here. You talked about how MoMA is really progressed by leaps and bounds. Just there was a 4-year period when you were actively involved in digitization and wrangling all your digital files, and over the last year, it seems like you've taken an exponential step forward. You yourself called it the beginning of a new era for digital conservation here at MoMA. How long do you expect this era to last? You've moved into it very quickly. Are you going to move through it very quickly and into the next thing as well?
Well, the position we're in right now is kind of a holding pattern. We are using the systems that we've built, and we're learning from them. We're sort of taking stock of how well they work. And over the course of the next few years, we intend on continuing to use them as they are and optimizing them. But there is the fact that things change. Technology evolves. So as I wouldn't say any later than 10 years from now, we'll likely throw everything out and start over because that's just how these things go.
And I noticed that's as far as your timeline went as well. You got up to 2025 and then it's sort of an open question after that.
Yeah, you can't speculate any further than 10 years out, I think, when it comes to, look at the digital preservation field 10 years ago.
What digital preservation field?
Well, there was a field 20 and 30 years ago. It's just when you look at the way we talked about emulation, for instance, in the 90s, it sounded like science fiction, whereas today it's real. and it's actually software as a service. And
it's a necessary process.
exactly, yes.
Yeah. Well, I guess we'll see you at DAS in 5, 10, 15, 25 years.
Let's hope so.
Well, always with something new.
Yeah.
That's great. Thanks a lot, Ben.
Great. Thank you.